Hey, really quick before we start, I just wanted to announce that we recently hit the 1-year anniversary of the channel, and I wanted to host a Q&A to celebrate. If you're interested, you can send your questions directly to somePhoenixgme at Gmail. Will I get any replies? We'll see. You can stick around to the end if you want to hear more about that. Okay. The support role, as we know it in the hero shooter genre today, has had a storied history, with lots of ups and downs again. The release of characters like Baptiste in Overwatch was met with notable amounts of controversy, and to this day the game's supports remain a point of contention within the game's community. Then in Marvel Rivals, the support ultimates and triple support have been a sticking point for a lot of people almost since the game's release. And these examples are just scratching the surface of the problems these two different communities had and continue to have with their respective games' support roles. Indeed, even with the genre being around for so long, it's quite clear that the developers still haven't ironed out all the kinks when it comes to the design of their support characters. If you've played Overwatch or Marvel Rivals for any amount of time, it's very likely that you yourself have taken a look at these games' support characters once or twice and thought to yourself that something just didn't feel quite right. Maybe you found them dull, or maybe you found them lame to play with and around. I know I certainly did. Hell, that's why I started my YouTube channel to begin with. In my opinion, the design of the supports in Marvel Rivals leaves a lot to be desired, and while I have found a lot more to appreciate as I've played the game more, several of the things that were bugging me have only continued to get on my nerves. Hence why I've gotten back into Overwatch with the release of their Season 1 update. It's been nice to immerse myself in a different take on the genre after so long spent pretty much only playing Rivals, and I was eager to play support in this game in particular. I already knew that Overwatch had its own problems, of course, but still, anything seemed better than Rivals' support problems at the time. Though after playing it again for a good few dozen hours, I found something that surprised me. Once we get into this, I'm sure this won't come as a shock to any of you who've played more Overwatch than me, but Overwatch's supports have more or less the exact opposite problems as the ones in Rivals. This got me thinking about the game design behind the support characters we know today. And having thought about it, I think the support role, more so than the others, outlines a lot of very interesting things within the genre. So, to sort of honor the 1-year anniversary of the channel, and of the first video I ever made, I want to talk about the support role. And my hope is that I can give you all a better idea of why the support characters in the most popular hero shooters today just don't feel quite right. Our focus will primarily be on Overwatch and Marvel Rivals, but I want to start by talking about an older game, because it'll help us understand why developers are even bothering with the support role even when nobody can seem to get it right, and it will also show us where a lot of common design decisions partly originated from. The game in question is Team Fortress 2, which remains an incredibly influential game to this day. Its diverse cast of characters who all play completely differently from each other went on to inspire what we now think of as the hero shooter genre, and you can still find bits and pieces of its DNA in nearly every game that carries that mantle. One character in particular sticks out though, and that's the Medic. In an already diverse cast, the Medic sets himself apart, offering a gameplay loop that is completely different from TF2's other mercenaries in a pretty fundamental way. The Medic rarely, if ever, gets to shoot the enemies in this competitive shooter game. Instead, his gameplay is entirely built around supporting his team. The Medic has virtually no way to make aggressive plays or engage the enemy in combat by himself, instead focusing on healing and buffing his teammates to better allow them to shine. There's a lot we can learn from very quickly breaking down the Medic and his design, so bear with me while I do just that. The Medic is completely defined by his powerful utility options and his near-complete lack of offensive tools. His main means of supporting his team is his Medigun, which is a single-target, auto-targeting heal that also provides temporary overhealth to allies already at max HP. By healing his allies, the Medic also builds Uber, which can be used to apply a powerful single-target buff to one of his allies depending on which Medigun he has equipped. If you're more familiar with modern examples of the genre, you can think of that as his ultimate. Beyond gambling on a random critical hit with his melee, or slow, long-range burst damage with the Crusader's crossbow, the Medic has no way to play aggressively himself, and this wasn't done for no reason. There are two big reasons for the Medic's kit to be set up this way, the first and most commonly cited one being balance. Here's the thing about healing. It's really strong, and this is for a pretty simple reason. Very basically, in order to win, you need to do things, and the list of things the player can do is directly tied to how much health they have. The more health you have, the more things you can do to contribute to victory. The amount of things you can do goes down as your health goes down, all the way up until you're dead and you can't do anything at all. Healing allows you to stay at high health for longer, which means you can do more things for longer, and the more things you're doing, the more you're contributing to victory. The medic even takes this one step further by providing his allies with overhealth, increasing their HP beyond their normal maximum and thus increasing the amount of things they can do beyond what they're normally capable of. Here, the idea behind the medic's limited offensive options is pretty simple. If the medic is allowing everyone on his team to contribute more to victory by keeping them all alive, then letting him contribute directly to combat on top of that would probably make him the best class in the game and it wouldn't be close. In, say, a 6v6 environment, you could probably get away with running 2 or 3 medics and be just fine. The second and less cited reason has more to do with the transition away from TF2's predecessor to the game we know today. The classes in Team Fortress Classic have a lot of overlap with each other, and the TFC Medic is a big example of this. He's far from the supportive character we know today, instead being a sort of hybrid offensive and utility character. There's nothing wrong with that, but he's also not as special, and he's not the only example of overlap in TFC's roster. In designing TF2, I believe it became a priority to make sure every class offered a unique gameplay experience, and the medic's ability to heal was what his identity was shifted into. While the TFC medic was more of a combat class, people found a lot of appeal in focusing on healing your team and helping them to succeed, and this unique gameplay loop was what the TF2 medic's class was built around. So in limiting his offensive options, the devs effectively force the player to engage with the unique gameplay loop the class provides. That unique gameplay loop is something we'll be talking about a lot. The medic really does play nothing like his fellow mercenaries, for better and for worse. TF2 helped introduce to the genre the idea that there are multiple ways for someone to engage with a game like this. At a higher level of play, the player is engaging very actively with almost all of the game's systems, but on a more casual level, people are likely to gravitate to experiences that appeal to them, and play characters that allow them to engage with those experiences. This being a shooter game, a lot of people are going to gravitate to things like direct combat, raw aiming skill, and aggressive playmaking, and play characters that allow them to focus on those things, but there are people to whom that doesn't hold their interest. Instead, these people may enjoy trying their hardest at things like positioning, cooldown management, movement, and planning, and that's exactly what the medic is going for. With no obligation to aim or engage in direct combat himself, the medic offers a far more relaxed and cerebral experience than the more twitchy direct combat classes, who are a lot more about reaction times and instinct, which has a lot of appeal to a lot of people. On the other side of that coin, though, the medic holds virtually no appeal to the kind of person who wants to engage with things like aiming and aggressive playmaking, and for a long time that was most players. Even for someone who wants to engage with things besides direct combat, the medic leaves a lot to be desired, and here's where we get into his big problems. While the medic can provide a fun, different gameplay experience, he can also be alternately boring and frustrating depending on the quality of the match he finds himself in. While the medic is clearly trying to offer something to the crowd that likes engaging with things like cooldown management, movement, etc. over direct combat or aiming, the medic's stock kit actually kinda struggles to provide these things. There's some movement you can do in healing a scout to gain movement speed, and you do have to build and know when to use your uber, but besides that, the medic doesn't really have much going on. While healing is incredibly strong, it's hard to feel that impact while you're actually playing the medic, and this is a simple matter of feedback. Killing someone has very clear feedback. You see the opponent go from doing things to doing literally nothing. You feel in an instant that what you did has had an impact on the game. But what feedback does healing have? You see your ally stand there, and then they keep standing there. If you're observant, you can see your ally push forward or make a play they wouldn't have if you weren't there, but generally it doesn't really feel like you're accomplishing anything most of the time. It more so feels like you're maintaining the status quo. And moment to moment, the medic doesn't have much going on besides healing, which compounds with his lack of offensive tools to create a potentially extremely frustrating experience. His having to rely on his team is great for making the player engage with a unique gameplay experience, but if your allies don't know which end of the gun the bullets come out of, then no matter what you do, you're screwed. The medic player has very little agency. He can help his team do better and enable game-winning plays, he can always stand where he needs to be and always be healing the right guy, but it's still up to his team to secure the win. If his team isn't playing the game, the medic has no tools to carry them to victory. He can't kill high-value targets or make big plays by himself. This can be frustrating when you're sitting back healing your team and you see an opportunity that no one goes for. You know you could make a big difference if you were playing any other class, but you just have to stand by and hope your team takes that opportunity. And these issues are things that I think the devs were well aware of, because two of the medic's strongest unlockable weapons, the Crusader's crossbow and the Ubersaw, are designed to give the medic more to think about and to encourage him to search for opportunities to get some damage in. The crossbow is a long-range option that either heals allies or damages enemies depending on who you hit, which encourages you to be on the lookout for injured allies in need of burst healing or wounded enemies who you may be able to finish off, and the saw very simply gives you ubercharge for hitting enemies, encouraging you to play more aggressively and to be on the lookout for opportunities to get a melee hit in. This is much better, but you're still largely reliant on your team to set you up. If nobody wants to push into close quarters, then you're not likely to get any saw hits in, and if your team can't hit anything, then your crossbow's offensive capabilities are kind of moot. And all that is before we get into what is perhaps the most obvious source of frustration. The medic is priority number 1 for nearly every other class in the game. If someone on the enemy team is preventing their allies from dying, then you're naturally going to want to take them out early to make killing everyone else easier, especially so since the medic is almost defenseless by himself. This adds an extra layer of gameplay and decision-making that can add a lot to a team fight, but for the medic player it means that you're going to be getting focused down a lot, and there isn't really much you can do about that. While the medic does have passive health regen, there is little he can do to protect himself more actively. He can try and position carefully, but even here he struggles to have agency. He needs to be wherever his team is, and if his team is trying to hold in an area where he's exposed, then what is the medic supposed to do? Not heal his team? Pretty much the only thing the medic can do when he's targeted is gamble on a random crit with his melee or waste his ubercharge to try and save his own life, neither of which are ideal. And all this doesn't help with that frustrating lack of independence the medic has. All this isn't to say he doesn't have his fans, but speaking as a support lover myself, the medic leaves a lot to be desired. When I was super into TF2, I gravitated to the engineer, a support-oriented class who's far more active and does actually get to shoot people with his gun every now and again, and we'll get into how he makes that work in a moment. Nevertheless, there's an undeniable appeal to healing someone or buffing them up and watching them succeed. The idea has a lot of potential, and ever since the medic graced the battlefields of TF2, the developers who have made the hero shooter genre what we know it today have been struggling to make their support characters work. So with all that laid out, we can better understand the decisions the more modern hero shooter developers have taken in regards to their support characters. While Overwatch would be next in the timeline, I'm going to move on to talking about Marvel Rivals, because it has a lot more direct translations of the same concepts that we see in TF2, a lot of the same problems, some attempted solutions to those problems, and some all-new issues stemming in part from those solutions. Speaking as someone who's talked about them several times, the supports in Rivals do have a lot more going on than I originally gave them credit for. Most of them still have the issue with healing being their primary job, so they can struggle to feel impactful on the moment-to-moment level, but they have more going on besides to supplement that. If you enjoy putting your focus on cooldown management, positioning, movement, etc., then Rivals has several characters who will likely hold a lot of appeal to you. When I feel like sweating my ass off playing this game, one of the characters I gravitate to is Cloak and Dagger, because rather than testing my ability to aim or crack off combos, they allow me to express my skill in positioning, cooldown management, and game sense, which I find a lot more fun and interesting, and other characters hold similar appeal. Playing as Invisible Woman, there's mastery involved in knowing when to play closer to the front to help stack damage on the front line with her primary and abilities, or figuring out how best to use her shield. At least before they nerfed her shield into uselessness because Invis players would shit themselves and cry over reverting the self-shield buff that literally nobody asked for and everybody hates, but that's besides the point. Even a character like Rocket, who I personally cannot stand playing, has some appeal if you enjoy using your mobility and map knowledge to be a little shit. In Rivals, we also see a potentially very useful tool to have in a character-based game, a character having gameplay elements unique to them that gives the player more to chew on. We see this very clearly with the engineer in TF2. Building and managing a nest is unique and engaging, and occupies the player on the moment-to-moment level, but we can also see it in less dramatic ways. Stuff like cycling your mark or your drones on Luna, Snow, or Ultron, or positioning so that your beam can do as much as possible at any given moment as Jeff. With these elements, it's already clear why there are more people who play support in games like Rivals today than who played Medic back when. And that's before we get into the great strides that have been made towards allowing supports to engage in combat. This was one of the sticking points I had with the supports initially, and I will say it's still not great, but it is leagues above where it was in TF2. What we essentially have for most of the Rivals supports is a building upon what the devs at Valve were going for with the crossbow and Ubersaw. Most of the supports can't engage in combat with impunity, but they have tools that encourage them to be on the lookout for opportunities to get some damage in, snag kills, and help push advantages. What separates Rivals from TF2 here is the greater frequency with which the support is given these opportunities and the increased impact they are allowed to have. With all the new tools the supports have been given, the issues with being targeted are felt a lot less. They have more outs in the form of mobility, sustain, and defensive power, and this both gives them more free reign to, exist on the battlefield, and it also allows them to use these tools to stage more aggressively, and make and survive plays that the Medic could never dream of. The increased impact they can have, meanwhile, is felt for two reasons. For one, the strength of the offensive tools given to the supports, and for two, the environment the supports find themselves in. The offensive tools the Rivals supports have, while still limited, are more potent than the Medic's slow, single-shot crossbow. Cloak and Dagger's auto-aim or Invisible Woman's piercing projectiles are great for confirming kills on wounded enemies, and can work almost passively. Luna Snow's primary can be devastating if you can sneak in a headshot on someone, and Rocket's primary can shred a tank's health bar up close. All of these are potent on their own, but can be extremely valuable because of how much healing there is in Rivals. A big job of the supports in Rivals that I don't think enough people talk about is helping to confirm kills. Healing numbers in Rivals are crazy high, so someone on low HP can be saved in an instant. That little bit of extra damage that a support can provide goes a long way. So basically, if you're playing a support, any support, and you end the game with 0 final hits, you're doing it wrong. As someone who enjoys playing support to support my team, this is great. It's great for making you feel more impactful while you're putting your focus on your team and not on chasing kills. But if that isn't your thing, the supports in Rivals still have something for you. There are multiple supports who are more or less entirely built around engaging the enemy in direct combat, foregoing actively supporting their team in favor of the simple joy of shooting people. This bridges the gap between the support and DPS gameplay experiences, providing both the gratification that comes from supporting your allies and the moment-to-moment excitement that comes from engaging the enemy in combat. But what about the potential balance issues we talked about? Were those just overblown? Not really. See, the more offensively oriented supports all have big trade-offs in their kits. Mantis, Adam Warlock, and Ultron all have comparatively much worse healing than other supports like Invis, Luna, Snow, or Cloak and Dagger. They also feature more limited utility options. Mantis and Ultron have much worse mobility than any other support, and even their offensive options aren't as good as some of the other supports because they get to use theirs all the time. The game also uses its ultimates to balance the offensive supports. With the exception of Mantis, the more aggressive supports don't have the same essential healing circle ultimates the main supports have, which is a hole in your team that you're absolutely gonna feel. This is essential for these characters and keeps everything balanced and feeling good, at least in theory. While there are a bunch of problems with the supports in Rivals, we're primarily going to be focusing on two: triple support and the experience of the average player. We're going to start with that second one. While big strides have been made, at the average skill level, the supports are still heavily reliant on their teams. Capitalizing on your team's plays by getting damage in and confirming kills is an important part of playing support in this game, but if your team is playing with their monitors turned off, then we're back to square one. At least at the average skill level, you can't really do anything but heal and hope you get the opportunity to make a contribution. It's still extremely difficult to carry on a support. Even the supports who can engage in combat freely and have a degree of carry potential are very limited at this skill level. Healing is extremely in demand in Rivals, and not being able to fulfill that demand in an average 2 support game where everyone just wants to face tank everything is going to lead to a bad experience. These supports are thus largely pigeonholed into 3 support team compositions, which can work, but seldom in the hands of the average team of 6 dingbats. So even these supports are heavily reliant on their teams to perform. However, when you do get a team that can make a 3 support comp work, we run into some issues that aren't entirely unexpected. The issue you'll likely face playing against a good 3 support comp is pretty simple. Nobody ever fucking dies. Remember that healing numbers in Rivals are extremely high, so with 3 supports all healing everybody almost constantly, if you aren't on top of your game, it's gonna be extremely hard to get anything done. With all the healing, a 3 support comp has way more room to make mistakes. So basically, in a game with 2 teams of roughly average skill, the one running 2 supports has to play almost perfectly, while the 3 support team can play much more relaxed. In this exchange, the 3 support comp has a big advantage, and even in the scenarios where they don't, it's still incredibly annoying. Team fights against a triple support comp at any skill level can drag on for way longer than it feels like they should. You'd intuitively think that a 3 support comp is going to have less damage output than a 2-2-2 composition, and you'd be right, but it's not hard to make up for. If nobody on the 3 support team is dying, then they can afford to kill the enemy just a little bit more slowly. Besides, a big crux of any 3 support comp are the more aggression-oriented support characters, who can make up for the damage somewhat. And more crucially, with 2 other supports helping with the healing, individual support characters can have way more opportunities to make aggressive plays. Luna Snow can go from trying to sneak in a headshot every so often while healing to being a lethal marksman when she has 2 other supports helping to pick up her slack. And when it really comes down to it, in this game defined by its support ultimates, the 3 support comp can have 3 invincibility ults while you can't. This isn't to say 3 support completely runs away with the game. With 3 supports all competing for healing stats, they're going to get their ultimates considerably slower than a 2 support comp, and this can absolutely lead to lost fights. Plus, skilled players can use the right characters and more advanced tactics to kill through 3 support healing, but there's the kicker. For skilled players, 3 support is much less of an issue. For lower skilled players, it remains an awful slog. Even if you can deal with it, a 3 support comp absolutely mauls certain characters, and being disallowed from playing the character you want to play feels lame as hell. If you're an average gamer, just don't try playing Spider-Man into a competent 3 support team where the supports are all looking out for each other. It is so hard to get anything done. And that speaks to a really grave issue with these team comps. They almost make the DPS role kind of irrelevant. I don't know if that would actually happen in Rivals, considering how insane the designs of some DPS characters are, but do put a pin in that, because we'll be coming back to it in a moment. And while 3 supports build their crucial invincibility ultimates more slowly, there is nothing more lame in this entire game than when a big ult fight breaks out and you lose because the enemy team got to make themselves invincible for longer than you did. 3 support comps can definitely feel like a problem. However, the issues we have with our supports in Rivals have all been felt before. It's worth remembering that Rivals was made almost 10 years after the hero shooter genre as we understand it today was defined. And as bad as some things are, I do think lessons were learned. It's just perhaps that the application of those lessons wasn't perfect. That's gonna bring me to Overwatch. It's telling in this game that 2 of the first support characters players got their hands on were Mercy and Zenyatta. Mercy is very much a medic offshoot, but with more going on in the form of her mobility, which is fun to use and requires mastery, and her having to cycle between targets with her healing and her damage boost. Zenyatta, meanwhile, is the progenitor of the aggressive support archetype, with 2 single-target, largely passive abilities in his Healing Harmony Orb and his Damage Vulnerability Discord Orb, allowing him to put all of his focus on shooting. Immediately, the developers of Overwatch appeared to be looking to improve upon the Medic's shortcomings and expand upon what a support character could be, and this attitude persists throughout their support releases. Pretty much every support has something in their kits to keep the player engaged, whether that be something unique to them that's fun to use and requires mastery, like with Mercy and Juno's mobility, the ability to contribute to combat more readily in the case of Baptiste and Ana, or a kit focused entirely around engaging in combat in the case of Brigitte, Zenyatta, and Lucio. And I didn't list 3 in that last category for no reason. Most of the supports in Overwatch today are designed to have unrestricted ability to engage the enemy in combat, and in fact, several of them need to engage in combat in order to heal and support their team. This is a very different approach than what we see in Rivals, and I won't mince words, it has a lot of predictable consequences. Getting the good out of the way first, if you like playing to support your team, there is a lot to like with the supports in Overwatch. Supporting feels way more active in this game than it does elsewhere. The problem with the gameplay feeling static and like you can't really do anything is almost completely gone. Between each of the supports we see all the features we've already talked about, and there's always something to do and something for you to consider. There are still supports who can struggle with a bad team like Mercy and Lifeweaver, but most of them have a degree of carry potential. Moira's mobility and self-healing can allow her to snag kills, Baptiste can get game-changing picks with good aim, and that's only the beginning of what they're capable of. Wu Yang can snipe people around corners, Brigitte can be a frontliner or 1v1 machine. There's some crazy stuff the supports can do. If you're the kind who likes engaging with the game on the level of positioning, cooldown management, etc., you might feel a little bit left behind by Overwatch's more aggressive supports, but otherwise they're not bad at all. In the hands of someone with a little experience, they never struggle to feel impactful. But we should already know that a lot of problems have arisen from this design philosophy. The culmination of the problems we saw with the 3 support comp in Rivals were, in some ways, felt with Overwatch years ago. Baptiste was loathed by some people back when he was released for basically being a better DPS character. His weapon was strong at range, pinpoint accurate, had loads of ammo, and was coupled with mobility perfect for taking angles and high ground and multiple great survivability tools, all while still being able to heal his team. If you could aim, Baptiste was a monster, and in the right hands, he still is. This was a big example of a reoccurring controversy with Overwatch's supports. Spend enough time in the right circles and you'll hear the words DPS but good get thrown around a lot. And then there's a decently direct parallel to Rivals' 3 support problems, the game's infamous GOATS meta. This was an acronym for Go All Tanks and Supports, and it, plus Blizzard's inability to manage it and other team comps like it, is frequently cited as the reason why current year Overwatch has role queue. The tank role, in particular, was targeted with lots of blame here. Now, tanks were and are a source of a lot of Overwatch's problems, including GOATs. I'm not trying to claim otherwise, but I don't think you can put the blame on an entire role being made basically redundant on just one of the game's other roles. This team comp worked by exploiting the strengths of 6 characters to basically form an unstoppable boulder that just rolled over the enemy team. You'd speed boost in, have everybody constantly heal and use their damage negation tools, all while everybody pumped out a near constant stream of damage into the enemy. Whereas 3 support in Rivals does feel that lack of damage from running fewer DPS characters, GOATs really didn't. The team comp was lethal. Yes, in part due to the tank characters it used, but also due to the supports it used giving up a very little in exchange for their healing, utility, and mobility. Each support could heal and do whatever else it was they did, all while dealing damage. So basically, it was that nobody ever fucking dies problem combined with much greater damage and aggression, leaving the enemy desperately trying to hold as they get bowled over by a nigh-immortal enemy team. You can find old clips of GOATS comp on YouTube just trampling over an enemy team without stopping and winning a game in less than like 2 minutes. It was genuinely kind of appalling. You might say this was due to the individual characters involved in the GOATS comp. That's a complaint you might hear in relation to Overwatch's implementation of role queue, that it was only done because Blizzard were unable or unwilling to simply balance the most problematic characters. But I think there are certain core design issues that are more to blame. Let me ask you a simple question. What is the identity of each role? What are the characters in each role broadly all trying to do? The tank role is simple. They are there to create and control space. Winston can jump on problematic enemies to give his team some breathing room, Ryan can use his shield to help his team safely push up, etc. But what about the other roles? DPS is the hardest to pin down because the DPS role covers heroes from Mei to Soldier 76 to Widowmaker, who are all very different. But I think most people wouldn't disagree if I said the DPS characters are generally expected to put the pressure on and get kills. I mean, if you've ever been in a game where nobody on the enemy team is dying, who do people blame? Usually the DPS players, right? So let's say that's the DPS role's job. It's certainly why most people play the role, I think. The DPS characters are on the team to apply pressure and get kills. Now, when I say the supports can engage in combat and have carry potential, this is pretty much what I mean. The supports can apply pressure and get kills like a DPS can, while also being able to support their teams. Okay, so if that's what we want from the supports, then that begs the question. What else can the DPS characters do? I mean, they're gonna need something if the supports are gonna be able to do both things. Well, the thing is, it depends on the character. However, the supports all have one thing in common. They can all heal. Remember what I said about healing? It's really strong, and that never stopped being true. How valuable what an individual DPS character can provide to their team in addition to the pressure they can apply and the kills they can get fluctuates depending on the game's meta. But healing is always good. You always need to be doing things to win, and healing lets you do more things. So the rub is, if the supports can engage in combat just like a DPS can, and be providing healing to their teams at the same time, then why would you play a DPS? Obviously the DPS shouldn't be the only role allowed to do damage and get kills. I'm not saying the support role should be just relegated to heal botting, but what distinguishes these two roles? Well, you might think that the supports are held back by their obligation to heal and support their teams. However, there are several things that make this not hold up. As you get better at the game, you become obligated to use your character's kit to its fullest potential. If your kit is designed in a way that makes it really good at engaging in combat, then you are obligated to take advantage of that. If you're playing Baptiste and you can get a major advantage by just ignoring your team and gunning people down, then that's what you're gonna do, obligation or no. Besides, there are several supports whose ability to support their team is greatly de-emphasized, ranging from Moira, who needs to damage enemies in order to heal, placing healing lower on the priority list, all the way to Wu Yang, for which it is arguably throwing to try and hang back and support your team because so much of the value from his kit comes from sniping enemies with his water bubbles. And furthermore, not only are people going to become less reliant on their support's healing as they get better at the game, there are also a lot of characters designed around functioning independently of their supports. It's more than possible to run a team comp where the supports barely have to do anything to back their teammates up. And even if you aren't running such a team comp, there are multiple supports who can support their teams passively. These supports don't have to put any attention on helping their team, instead just doing whatever in their vague vicinity. So if the supports aren't being held back by their obligations, then I ask again, what distinguishes the support role from the DPS role? Besides their ability to heal, there really isn't anything. Other supportive utility options aren't exclusive to the support role, and many supports can play extremely similarly to a DPS character. So if the supports are just DPS who can heal, then why would I ever pick a DPS character? Unless a DPS character has a specific tool that makes them shine in the current meta, or just has stats so broken you can't not use them, you likely wouldn't. And I think that, beyond the individual strengths of the characters involved, is what led to the infamous GOATS comp. There was just no reason to play any of the DPS characters because the supports could do everything they could and more. So whereas the supports in Rivals are kind of static and can struggle to feel impactful, the supports in Overwatch have the exact opposite problem. They are way too good at engaging in combat, to the point where the role's identity has been completely diluted. And that leads us to this, my biggest issue with the supports in Overwatch. There's a pretty simple question hanging over the role as it stands right now. If there's nothing that distinguishes how the support characters play from the DPS characters besides the fact that they can heal, then what's the point? What is the point of there being a distinction between these two roles? If the supports can engage in combat with little to no restrictions, have strong mobility tools, good damage, and offensively oriented ultimates, then what distinguishes them from the DPS role? It's not like supportive tools are exclusive to the support role. Soldier 76 can deploy an AoE heal, Symmetra's teleport can help the team get into position and make plays, Sombra can hack health packs to ensure her team can get them, and hack enemies to shut them down when they try to make plays. So I ask again, what is the distinction between these two roles? The reality is, there really isn't one. Change a few things about Moira's kit and she could easily be a DPS. Change basically nothing about Alari's kit and she could be a DPS. There is nothing that distinguishes these characters from a DPS except for that they can heal. And on the other side of that coin, take Sombra or Soldier 76 and change some things around in their kits and they could easily be supports. That's how thin the lines are between these two roles. And I ask again, if there's nothing that distinguishes these two roles, then what's the point? Just have tank and not tank. You could use the perk system to let the player spec into playing more supportive on certain characters or something. This has further problems for the support experience. Like I said, if you're the kind of person who plays support to engage with the game in ways outside of direct combat, then your choices, at least the choices you can make without basically throwing, are much more limited. You can't play Wu Yang, Brigitte, Moira, or Alari to engage separately with positioning or cooldown management. It's all combat all the time. Which might be whatever, but we've really lost sight of what was being done with the Medic all those years ago. There's little in the way of unique gameplay experience that provides its own form of gratification. The supports in this game are much more flat. With all that laid out, I think there might have been a reason as to why the supports in Rivals are kinda static and samey. The Rivals devs were absolutely taking note of other games in the genre. Black Widow and Hawkeye would have never been designed the way they were if not for characters like Widowmaker and Hanzo, and I think the design of the supports, even the newer ones, was similarly influenced by the supports in other games. Like or hate the supports in Rivals, they are at least meaningfully distinct from the DPS role. So if that explains the issues with the supports in Rivals, then how the hell did Overwatch get to where it is? Well, Overwatch is a 10-year-old game, so there are no doubt dozens of things that have informed how the game was designed over the years, but let me lay out something I've been thinking about. Now more than ever, Overwatch has a ton of characters designed to function largely independently of their supports. This has always been a thing, and even a necessity. Two of the first supports in Overwatch were Mercy and Zenyatta, only one of which is equipped to handle the healing needs of a team, but even so, that's not really her job. Playing around health packs and staging and knowing when to push was always a core part of the game, and it's only become more so the case. Nowadays, multiple characters are even more strongly encouraged to play around health packs, having unique bonuses that grant them more healing for picking them up. In addition, health regen is much more common, and everyone has access to free out-of-combat health regen, so with a little map knowledge and use of cover, anyone can heal off any damage they take. Plus, like I said, supportive utility isn't exclusive to the support role. So if you're playing a character designed to support your team, and your team can function largely independently of you, then what are you meant to be doing with your time? Besides engaging the enemy in combat, there really isn't anything else for the player to do, so that's what the devs landed on. The supports are basically DPS with healing, because how else are the support players meant to be playing the game? It makes me think that role queue wasn't just implemented because the devs couldn't figure out how to balance tanks. It feels more like someone decided this was the only way they could get people to actually play all the roles. How exactly we got here, I can't say. I'll admit I might be talking out of my ass. Like I said, this is a 10-year-old game and I wasn't even an adult for most of its lifespan. But I think it's safe to say things aren't changing significantly anytime soon. On that note, you'd normally end a video like this by talking about the changes you'd make and that you'd like to see, and I will do that some, but this video isn't so much meant for that. In fact, I wanted to do some of the opposite, outlining suggestions I've seen and then arguing why I don't think they would work or that they aren't so simple. It'd be easy to say, for example, that we have both extremes, the boring heal bots and the basically DPS characters, and that all we'd have to do is find the middle ground. But what does that really look like? Taking Rivals as an example, I definitely think Rocket is a boring heal bot, but what about Cloak and Dagger? They have a lot more going on, but most people will still label them as another heal bot. Then, on the other side of that coin, after his mobility buffs, Adam Warlock is pretty much just a DPS character who can heal. He's definitely not the middle ground, but I don't think anybody would complain about his kit. A big thing you have to remember when performing this kind of analysis is that, at the end of the day, the most important thing is whether or not the game is fun. Do you think the supports in Overwatch being DPS light or the supports in Rivals struggling to engage in combat and causing issues when they do makes the games less fun? In my opinion, yes, I think they do. However, I do think that characters like Illari are fun in a vacuum, same with Cloak and Dagger. It's just that the design ethos behind each of those characters is present in nearly every other support character in their respective games. So what I'm saying is, how would you fix an overarching problem caused by multiple individual characters? No one support in Overwatch causes the identity of the role to become diluted into DPS Lite, but the DPS Lite thing is still a problem. The Overwatch devs have essentially worked themselves into a corner, and they can't really work their way out of it without pissing a lot of people off. To their credit, the devs seem to be aware of Overwatch's issues regarding its supports, and one of their newest characters, Mizuki, seems to address a lot of them. He's absolutely a support. He can engage in combat and snag kills, but multiple aspects of his kit limit his ability to do so. Instead of constantly engaging, he plays around his team, poking and looking for opportunities to quickly dash in and push an advantage. It's a really fun support kit and a good step in the right direction, but then again, the same update that introduced him also added Jetpack Cat, who is another character you basically just play as a DPS, so... Marvel Rivals is a much younger game, so it hasn't quite worked itself into the same corner, but anything that I would suggest would entail huge overhauls to the game that might cause their own problems. If you reworked all the Immortality ults, then the offensive supports are being put on a more level playing field, which could lead to the game's 3 support issues being made even worse, and that's before we get into the potentially disastrous consequences regarding the game's offensive ults. The most pressing issue for a lot of people who play Rivals is how do you solve 3 support comps, and the thing with that is that I just don't know. I mean, I know a lot of people hate 3 support, but I honestly have never had a problem with it. At least at the levels of play I chill at, it's never been much of a problem, and in my experience, the 3 support comp definitely feels its slower ult charge and lower damage. Of course, that leaves the glaring issues with higher levels of play, where in Overwatch and in Rivals supports are much more of a problem. When surrounded by people who know how cover works, and when played by people who can actually aim, characters like Baptiste and Luna Snow go from the more mundane characters they are in the hands of the average gamer to lethal threats. However, things like Baptiste and Luna Snow and Goat's meta were almost certainly not felt nearly as strongly for people who played the game casually than it was for the Sweats, who are a minority. Should you care about those levels of play, and how much, are fair questions to ask. If it sounds like I'm rambling, yeah, I kinda am, sorry, but what I'm getting at is that nothing in a game like this is simple, and I took that for granted when I made my first video on the design of Marvel Rivals' supports a year ago. However, I don't want to make it sound like the developers shouldn't try. The biggest sin that I think a developer can make, and that these developers have made, is to shy away from experimenting and shaking things up. There are plenty of valid concerns, but a misstep isn't something you can't correct later provided you actually, care. So let me try and lay out the problem. The hero shooter genre is all about offering new and varying experiences, and that's exactly what the support role provides. The support characters exist because they're an opportunity to provide a unique gameplay experience. However, while that experience is gratifying in its own way, it leads to the supports struggling to feel impactful on the moment-to-moment level. This is a problem in and of itself, and all of our other problems stem from trying to find solutions to it. You might take that as an excuse to throw the entire role away, but I would never go that far, because we know the idea can work. The engineer in TF2 is a supportive character, he provides a unique gameplay experience, and he's great. I know some people turn their noses up at the new Jeff, but I really like him and I think he's a perfect character for new players. Cloak and Dagger is a fun character in a vacuum, it's just that every other support in Rivals follows a similar design ethos. So with that, I want to paint with a broad brush and go over some ideas. Circling back to Luna and Baptiste, I think a problem a lot of developers run into is assuming the support kits they design will only ever be in the hands of a support player. That is to say, someone who plays to support their team, isn't too aggressive, and let's be honest, has on average lower mechanical skill. In the hands of such a player, Luna Snow's kind of absurd damage output isn't that big a deal because they're not actually going to be shooting the enemies all that often. But this ignores the potential issue of someone with far greater mechanical skill jumping on the character and using their absurd stats to their fullest potential. This isn't a catch-all observation, like I genuinely don't know what the thought process was with Wu Yang and Alari, but something like be more mindful of how a character functions in the hands of different kinds of players, and stop microbuffing characters until they ruin the game, don't feel that absurd as far as suggestions go. Of course, developers make balance changes for all sorts of reasons beyond the actual balance of the game. They might be encouraging the player base to pick up a character they feel has been unjustly ignored. And yes, skin releases also play a role, but still. A lot of our issues stem in part from a simple fact. All of our supports have healing as a key part of their kits. Healing is really strong, but doesn't feel all that impactful on the moment-to-moment level, so developers stack other things onto supports' kits to try and make them more interesting, which leads to balance and feel issues. So what if that wasn't the case? What if healing wasn't such a ubiquitous thing? This is an idea you hear a lot from MOBA players criticizing the genre, and while I hold as much disdain for Dota and League of Legends as the next guy, MOBAs are another inspiration for the hero shooter genre, and outside perspectives are valuable. That said, at least for the hero shooters we have today, I just don't think that would work. Take Rem from Deadlock. He can buff up allied minions, passively deny resources from the enemy, have special access to bonus resources almost nobody else gets via the game's underground tunnels, and he can use active items he buys on his allies. None of these things have anything to do with healing directly, but Rem is undoubtedly a support character. However, all of these things are predicated on gameplay systems that just don't exist in a hero shooter. Overwatch doesn't have minions, resources, or that same kind of point-of-interest-centric map design. Then again, there are supports in MOBAs that have more generic designs, but I still don't know if those would fit. A common theme is providing overshield and damage buffs, as seen in League of Legends' Lulu and Deadlock's Paige. This is a nice, supportive thing, but I don't think it's enough. In Marvel Rivals, loads of characters have the ability to give themselves overshield already, and Overwatch tried releasing a support character who didn't heal and instead gave her allies overshield, and did other things like leverage area denial tools and help her allies stage in odd locations, and nobody liked her. Then you have the question of what the supports are going to be doing moment to moment if not healing. If the answer is combat, then we might just have the identity problem again. You can have a support freely engaging in combat in a MOBA because combat in that genre can work for different characters in a variety of different ways. Some characters want to click on people, others want to combo their abilities, others teleport on top of you and insta-kill you, others shit in the woods for 15 minutes, but we're talking about a genre of shooter games here, and there are only like 2 ways you can make combat work there. The idea might have some merit in Overwatch if you wanted to take the idea of just abolishing the role distinction between DPS and support seriously, which I'd say is highly unlikely but not impossible, but other than that, I don't want to say you couldn't make it work, but you'd have to design a hero shooter from the ground up with healing not being core to the role in mind if you wanted to make it distinct. It's just not a solution for the games we have right now. So if we're stuck with healing, then we're gonna have to make it work. We might consider making sure every support has something unique that keeps the player engaged, like Jeff's beam, Mercy's mobility, stuff like that. This also isn't an uncommon thing. The engineer in TF2 is an example that predates the coining of the genre, but it isn't so simple to come up with a purely unique thing for each character. There are things you can repeat and do different takes on. For instance, Mercy has a unique movement style that requires mastery, as does Juno, but that'll only take you so far. Besides, just because it's unique doesn't mean it makes for healthy character design. Wu Yang being able to snipe people around corners is unique, but it also makes him a DPS light character because it requires all of his attention and his kit has literally nothing else going on. Anyway, coming up with something wholly unique is far from easy, let alone doing it for every support character. So let's look at something we know can work. If we want to have a support who engages in combat, which we do, they make for fun characters, then we should still make sure their kit incorporates a trade-off or a restriction, right? This one is definitely something developers have lost sight of. Like, what trade-off does Allari have, really? She has 2 good heals, decent mobility, a lethal hit scan gun, and a powerful offensive ultimate. What more can you ask for? Then in Rivals, White Fox kind of had a trade-off in that her neutral was crap compared to similar support characters, but then they panic buffed her, so... Anyway, the thing with a trade-off, though, is that what the character provides needs to be worth it. Zenyatta in Overwatch is absolutely worth that trade-off. Discord Orb is an extremely potent ability, but then you have cases like Adam Warlock before his mobility buffs, where his kit just didn't offer anything substantial in exchange for his worse healing and utility. Then again, Discord Orb is powerful enough to be worth the trade-off, but that's partly because it is awful to play against, especially if you're a tank player. It's basically a magic trick, but instead of pulling a rabbit out of a hat, you look at the enemy tank and make his health bar disappear. What I'm getting at is that developers probably fell off giving their supports meaningful trade-offs because it's kinda hard and they have deadlines. Making sure the trade-off is worth it and not too harsh is a tricky balancing act, and some things that are gonna be worth that trade-off are still gonna be goddamn awful to play around. This is both a challenge to design and a challenge to balance with the game's shifting meta. But again, that's not an excuse to not try. Something is better than nothing. What kind of trade-off would I give, for example, Allari? I don't really know. But to close out, there is an idea I want to put forward. A reoccurring issue I see with supports in hero shooters is what I'm gonna call fight-to-heal design. This is where a support has to engage in combat in some way in order to heal their team, like with Moira's or Mizuki's resource meters, or Brigitte's rally passive in Overwatch. The reason this is an issue is because if you want to tie a support's ability to heal to their ability to do damage, they need to be built to do damage, and the more they're built to do damage, the more they can ignore supporting their team in favor of it. You can make this work. Mizuki, barring his one perk that I think pushes his offensive power just a little bit over the line, is an example, but it's another tricky balancing act. However, we might be able to skirt this issue altogether. There is a support character in Paladins named Furia, and she is so spectacular that I am genuinely shocked she hasn't been ripped off yet. Furia is an aggressive-leaning support. Ignoring the game's talent and loadout system, her only heal is her single-target right-click. However, her offensive tools at first seem to be unimpressive. She has a stun, some okay mobility, and a really weak primary, but then you notice her passive. By healing her allies, Furia builds up her resource meter, which in turn increases the fire rate of her primary. This is how she does damage, and how you get the most out of her kit. Rather than fighting to heal, she heals to fight. It's the opposite of how these other supports work, and Furia functions amazingly. She can't just ignore her team to DPS, so she has a distinct identity, but at the same time, she's not wholly dependent on her team. She's not beholden to her team to give her opportunities. She can shoot, hit her stuns, and engage all on her own. She just can't do so without also doing her role's job. Now, this wouldn't work without Paladins' other systems. The global anti-healing system causes supports to noticeably fall off in the late game, so we skirt the DPS but better issue, but it doesn't lead to the supports feeling useless either. The talent and loadout system allows them to provide additional utility to their teams or gain additional offensive power to fill in the gaps. Now, am I saying every hero shooter should turn themselves into Paladins? Yes. No. The supports in Paladins had their own storied history and jank, but what I'm saying is that the developers found something that worked for them and made the role feel distinct and impactful. Paladins had my favorite support experience out of any hero shooter I've played. Landing a fat stun as Ceres, moving around and repositioning Luna as Io, juggling Marks as Corvus, all ideas we've seen before, but Paladins I think really pulled them off, and there's something we can learn from their success. Implementing a basic heal-to-fight design philosophy may be an important step in making the supports in other games work, whether we're talking about supports who don't engage enough, or the ones who engage in combat too much. There's more I could talk about, like the difference of implementation in Paladins' and Overwatch's anti-healing systems and the effects that might have on each game's supports, and we can argue back and forth some more about how much anybody should actually care about things like Illari being basically a DPS character or the supports in Rivals being kinda dry, but if I wanted to keep going, this video would never come out. Sorry again for rambling, this is just a topic I feel like I could talk about for hours, and maybe I will someday, but that was never supposed to be the point of this video. I'm gonna admit, this one kinda got away from me a bit, hence the delay, but now that we're here, I want to ask you something. What do you want out of a support? Me personally, I want the core of the experience to be about supporting my team. I find that fun and gratifying, but what about you? If you're a support player, do you just want something easy? Do you want something different? Do you just want to play a character that can heal? And if you aren't a support player, what do you think they should be? I sincerely want to know. So, I'm really struggling to end this video right now, so here are some things my family jokingly suggested over dinner. I come not to praise Caesar, but to bury him. I have a very particular set of skills. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Okay, we're back with another end of video notes, whatever you want to call them. So, as you saw in the beginning of the video, I'm trying to hold a Q&A to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the channel. You know, I am well aware of the possibility of just getting no replies. I know I'm not a very large channel, but I still just thought it would be fun. I announced this back in April in a channel announcement, but I wanted to announce it in a video first. So, and then this video got delayed, so anyway, yeah. So I wanted to do that, and then I also am trying to just do kind of as part of like a end of year, or as part of a 1-year celebration, just do like a year in review, and also just talk about the future direction of the channel, kind of reach out for feedback. If you're interested, you'll see that in probably like a month's time, maybe. I don't know. So that's basically what I wanted to say. Just I'm trying to do that, like the Q&A, do a sort of year in review, and I hope you all enjoy the video, and I hope you all stick around for, you know, hopefully a good many more years to come, because I am extremely happy with, you know, the progress I have made in this year. Yeah. See you.